There's a frightening gun violence pattern developing in the U.S., and it's happening in America's schools. 17 school shootings took place just 11 weeks into 2018. That's an average of 3 shootings every 2 weeks. But even with these scary statistics, lawmakers have yet to pass any major weapons legislation to change the trend. On this special edition of SUTV News, we'll take a closer look at the scope of the gun violence problem and why U.S. politicians can't seem to agree. And it's all right now.
Nothing in my entire life has affected me that much, ever.
Well, the goal of this legislation is to create an incentive for the rest of the states to do what Florida and 5 other states have already done.
Lutheran Church in North Portland. He's pushing for stricter gun laws.
Second Amendment, yes. Weapons of war, no.
We can make a change, and that our change will hopefully lead to no fear in schools.
I say enough is enough.
Gun control is one of the most controversial topics of the moment. Recent tragedies fueled a public debate about gun rights and the Second Amendment. Can gun rights and gun control coexist?
Thanks for joining us on this SUTV special edition on gun control. I'm Jake Gillespie. We begin tonight with breaking news from San Bruno, California, where the city manager says she received multiple 911 calls from YouTube headquarters reporting shots fired. San Bruno police tweeted that they were responding to an active shooter. Police were searching employees as they filed out of the building. Officials say the suspected shooter was a woman and is now dead. The San Bruno police chief says at least 4 are wounded. We'll bring you more updates on this developing story as they come in. Before we talk about gun control legislation, it's important to understand the scope of the gun violence issue. To help walk us through the numbers, here's SUTV's Joe Rodriguez.
According to the Washington Post, there are an estimated 357 million firearms nationwide. So far in 2018, there have been more than 12,000 incidents involving guns, more than 5,000 number of injuries, more than 3,000 number of deaths, and 377 unintentional shootings. According to the Washington Post, more than 187,000 students have been exposed to gun violence at school since Columbine. The Gun Violence Archive suggests that 144 children aged 0 to 11 and 593 teens aged 12 to 17 have been killed or injured by firearms.
Thanks, Joe. And even with these numbers, no major gun legislation has been passed in over 2 decades. Much of the gun control debate stems from interpreting the meaning of the Second Amendment. But a major problem facing the American public is how to find unbiased information on the subject. But Joe Rodriguez caught up with constitutional expert Dr. Stephen Lishman to walk us through the ins and outs of the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment states that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But what exactly does that mean?
Well, the Second Amendment means what the Supreme Court will tell us it means. And until 2010, somewhat surprisingly, they hadn't said a word about it. In 2010, in a case called D.C. versus Heller, they had to evaluate a Washington, D.C. law that said if you're going to own a gun in your home, it has to be either disassembled or it needs to be trigger locked. And so in this case, for the first time, the Supreme Court's going to have to explain what the Second Amendment means and how far it goes. State or federal, the right is you have the right to a gun in the privacy of your own home for the purpose of self-defense.
The Supreme Court decision also gave government regulatory power over firearms.
Once you decide to take your gun outside of your house, the full regulatory authority of government can come down on you. If the government wants to ban the possession of firearms in public, they can.
As the conversation about gun control grows, Dr. Lichman urges the public not to feed into misleading political information.
My enthusiasm about public awareness gets tempered. I think there's been a lot of misdirection, and I think a lot of people have been misled by political actors who have their own agenda and misled into thinking that the Second Amendment means something that in fact it does not mean. And it's very difficult for everyday people to sift through what is reliable and what is downright fiction.
Dr. Lishman has one piece of advice to avoid misleading information.
Read. And stop listening to the NRA and stop listening to, for that matter, gun control advocates who are equally misleading about the meaning of the Second Amendment.
It looks like the conversation about gun rights is far from over. For SUTV, I'm Joe Rodriguez.
We'll be hearing more from Dr. Lishman later in the show. But when we come back, how a school shooting in Maryland could help turn the tide in the gun control debate. Don't go away. Welcome back to this SUTV special edition with a spotlight on the gun control debate. Some pro-gun advocates say the only way to fix the gun violence issue is to fight fire with fire. But these advocates aren't just blowing smoke. The school shooting in Great Mills, Maryland demonstrated that trained professionals on site can respond quickly enough and effectively enough to make a difference. For the 17th time of 2018, America held its breath as news flooded in about yet another school shooting. A 17-year-old student opened fire on Tuesday, March 20th at Great Mills High School in Maryland. School Resource Officer Blaine Gaskell responded to the incident in under a minute. Gaskell exchanged fire with the shooter, who was later pronounced dead. Gaskell was unharmed. 2 other students were shot in the attack. A 16-year-old girl was shot in the head. Her parents made the decision to take her off life support after being pronounced brain dead. A 14-year-old boy was also hit in the leg. He was discharged from the hospital the following day. While the shooting still tragically resulted in death, School Resource Officer Blaine Gaskell's sub-minute response time likely prevented this attack from becoming a mass shooting. Many pro-gun arguments are fueled by the National Rifle Association. The NRA is a self-proclaimed firearms education organization and, quote, America's foremost defender of Second Amendment rights, end quote. But the NRA is also one of the largest political forces in America.
How politics works. This isn't just a bully buying the system. This is a very, very intelligent group that has intimately figured out American politics probably better than anybody else, any other lobbying group ever did.
Dr. Lishman says the NRA is one of the best in the lobbying business at mobilizing its voters, but it doesn't hurt to have money, and a lot of it. CNN reported that over half of lawmakers returning to Capitol Hill have received money and organizational help from the NRA. But the NRA spends its money on much more than just lobbying. The organization also funds programs to keep people safe. We continue now with Joe Rodriguez.
The NRA has worked for decades to preserve the Second Amendment. To see what they currently stand for, we took a look at a recent CNN interview with NRA spokesperson Dana Lash.
I don't want anyone to have their right to be able to defend themselves denied. I mean, they're adults at 20 years old. I want them to be able to protect themselves.
According to Lash, the group implements numerous programs that help the American people.
We have Eddie Eagle programs. We have the School Shield program, wherein schools have been encouraged to adopt steps to keep them safer and to make sure that children feel safe. We've trained law enforcement officers. No other organization has trained more law enforcement officers across the country than the NRA. Thousands across the country.
When it comes to the accessibility of guns, Lash mentions that changes need to be made at the point of sale.
7 million prohibited possessors right now will pass a background check. If they went out and purchased another firearm or got one today, they'd pass it because their records are not submitted into the National Crime Information Center. So when you run a NICS check, their name won't come up as being a prohibited possessor.
When talking about prohibited possessors, Lash places blame on politicians.
38 states submit less than 80% of these convictions. Yep. And there are 10 categories of prohibited possessor convictions. Adjudicated mentally unfit is one of those.
Yes.
And we have to call for politicians to have states submit those records,
okay.
All of them.
But not everyone agrees with the NRA.
These programs help train people to defend themselves. The FBI tracks what they call justifiable homicides by private citizens. This is when someone kills a felon as they carry out a crime. The FBI's annual crime report says that private citizens carried out over 2,500 of these justifiable homicides from 2007 to 2015. But when we come back, one organization took to the streets to tell politicians that enough is enough. More on that after the break. Well, the general consensus in politics is that if you don't like what politicians are doing, you can vote them out in an election. But the survivors of the shooting at a Florida high school decided that November was just too long to wait.
Since the time that I came out here, it has been 6 minutes and 20 seconds.
The shooter has ceased shooting and will soon abandon his rifle, blend in with the students as they escape, and walk free for an hour before arrest.
The Stoneman Douglas High School shooting survivors led the charge with the March for Our Lives. This protest is the result of growing frustrations with the government's lack of attention for gun violence.
This is everywhere. This is an epidemic. And the Stop School Violence Act does almost nothing to stop it.
The Stop School Violence Act proposes school grants for metal detectors and violence prevention programs, among other things. The document mentions that there will be no grants for firearm training in school. The protesters will not stop until the government takes action.
This is not the end. This was just the beginning.
The March for Our Lives united people all around the world to call for stricter gun laws in the United States.
The world is now waiting for you to change your gun laws. The world is now waiting for compassion.
Only time will tell how this movement will affect gun laws in the future. For SUTV, I'm Joe Rodriguez.
Crowd size estimates for the march measured into the hundreds of thousands. Those numbers only cover the march in Washington. The organization says over 800 marches took place across the globe on March 24th. Fortunately for us here at Shippensburg University, we didn't have to travel far to hear from some top experts in the field of politics. In fact, we've even had one expert come to us. Dr. Allison Dagnes is a political science professor with a background in American political media, institutions, and behavior. And she sat down with us to talk about how the gun control debate has impacted Americans.
One of the problems that we have now is that people are taking a very heated issue and they're moving it to the extremes. Most people would want what we call common sense gun control. And I think most Americans would agree that there should be background checks to make sure that the mentally ill cannot obtain a weapon easily, immediately. After the mass shooting 2 years ago, one of the mass shootings 2 years ago, there was a poll that was taken that said 88% of the American public believes in some kind of common sense gun control. Again, not taking away people's weapons. Even the most ardent of gun control supporters do not advocate for the abolition of the Second Amendment because we know that guns and hunting and self-defense are important in the fabric of our country. So that's one extreme that's not, it's not a realistic argument for the left. And on the right, really personified by the NRA and the very, very aggressive stand that they take, there is the idea that there should be no gun control measures whatsoever, that the laws that would try and ban certain types of weapons or that would make it more difficult for people to get certain types of weapons, that they would never work. I think that also is an extreme that many, many Republicans don't agree with. I hope that we can come together as a country, Democrats and Republicans, and come up with some compromises, because I don't think it really has to be an either-or proposition. And if the left promises we're not going to take away your guns, maybe the right can promise, okay, we'll make it a little bit more difficult to buy weapons that are tremendously dangerous, particularly if you have a criminal record or if you are not right in the head. And I think that we can get together and we can make that happen. And I think that's a good thing, because we're America and we got this.
If you want to hear more from Dr. Dagnes, check out the full interview on SUTVnews.com. And finally tonight, one Schuylkill County school district is thinking outside the box with its defense policy. Blue Mountain School District recently enacted an active shooter response program called ALICE. The acronym stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. But if things don't go to plan, the district has placed a 5-gallon bucket of river stones in each classroom. The district has been in the national media spotlight thanks to the unique defense policy. There's also been a lot of ridicule regarding the rocks on social media. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had to choose between a bucket of river rocks and just hiding under a desk and hoping for the best, well, I'd rather take my chances with the rocks. But that'll do it for this special edition of SUTV News. I'm Jake Gillespie. If you have questions or comments, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SUTV News, and check out our website, SUTVnews.com. We'll see you back here on Thursday for SUTV's regularly scheduled broadcast. Good night.